The church was silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded in my lap, staring at the mahogany casket that held my husband of 45 years, Richard Wallace, the man I'd loved since I was 23, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, gone. I was barely holding myself together when I heard the click of heels on the marble floor, sharp, deliberate, wrong. Everyone turned to look. A woman in a blood-red dress walked down the center aisle. She wasn't crying. She wasn't dressed in mourning. She looked like she was going to a cocktail party. My daughter, Sarah, grabbed my hand. "Mom, who is that?" I didn't know, but something in my chest told me I was about to find out. The woman stopped right in front of Richard's casket. She turned to face the crowd, her eyes landing on me with a look I'll never forget. Contempt mixed with victory. She smiled. "I'm sorry to do this here," she said, her voice cutting through the sacred silence like a knife. But Richard wanted everyone to know the truth. My heart stopped beating. The entire church held its breath. "My name is Jessica Davis. I was Richard's partner for the last 3 years, not just his business partner." She paused, letting that sink in. His real partner, the woman he actually loved. And before he died, he made sure I was taken care of. He left me everything. The house, the business, the accounts, all of it. She turned to look directly at me, her smile widening into something cruel. "You get nothing, old woman. He told me you were just a placeholder for the last 20 years, a caretaker who'd outlived her usefulness." The gasps around me sounded like they were coming from underwater. My son stood up, furious, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The woman I'd been for 68 years was crumbling right there in that church pew. Then the lawyer stood up. "Mr. Patterson, Richard's attorney for 30 years. He walked to the front with his briefcase, his face unreadable. "Miss Davis," he said quietly, "I have something for you." He pulled out a thick manila envelope and handed it to her. Jessica took it with trembling, excited hands. This was her moment, her victory. She tore it open, pulling out the documents inside. I watched her face. I watched the exact moment everything changed. The color drained from her cheeks. Her confident smile collapsed. Her hands started shaking so badly the papers rattled. What is this?" she whispered. And that's when I stood up. After 45 years of being the quiet wife, the supportive partner, the woman who never made waves, I finally found my voice. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Let me tell you who I really am. My name is Margaret Rose Wallace, and I'm 68 years old. To look at me, you'd see an ordinary grandmother. Silver hair I've worn in the same style for 20 years. Soft hands that have kneaded 1,000 loaves of bread. The kind of woman you'd see at church bake sales or volunteering at the local food bank. But I wasn't always this woman standing in a funeral home, being humiliated in front of everyone I knew. 45 years ago, I was Margaret Rose Cooper, a young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher. I met Richard Wallace at a college library. He was ambitious, charming, full of plans to change the world. I fell in love with his vision, his drive, his promises. When Richard got accepted to business school but couldn't afford it, I made a choice. I deferred my own education and worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night. My feet ached, my back hurt, but I didn't complain. I was investing in our future, in the man I loved. We married the year he graduated. I was still working those 2 jobs when I got pregnant with our first child, Sarah. Richard's new business was struggling. Money was tight. I worked until I was 8 months pregnant, came home, cooked dinner, and helped Richard prepare his presentations for investors. When the children came, 3 of them in 5 years, Richard's business finally started to grow. But growth meant travel. It meant long hours. It meant I raised our children essentially alone. Soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, midnight fevers, first heartbreaks. I handled all of it while Richard built his empire. I never resented it. I believed in the partnership. I believed in us. When Richard's mother had a stroke, she came to live with us. For 7 years, I cared for her, bathing her, feeding her, managing her medications, sitting with her through the long, confused nights when she didn't remember who I was. Richard's siblings sent greeting cards. I did the work. Everyone in our community knew me as the woman who held everything together, the one who brought soup to sick neighbors, the one who organized church fundraisers and volunteered at the elementary school library even after my own children graduated. I was kind because I believed kindness mattered. I was selfless because I thought that's what love looked like. I asked for so little in return, just loyalty, just the respect of being seen, just the acknowledgement that I had given my entire life to building something I thought we shared. I gave Richard everything, my youth, my dreams, my body, my time, my unconditional devotion, and he gave me nothing but lies. But here's what Jessica didn't know. Here's what Richard forgot in his arrogance and his midlife crisis and his desperate grab at feeling young again. I wasn't just a devoted wife. I wasn't just a kind old woman who could be discarded and forgotten. I was the woman who managed every penny of our household finances for 45 years. I was the woman whose name was on documents Richard signed without reading. I was the woman who Richard trusted so completely he never bothered to check what he was actually giving away. And I was about to make sure everyone in that church understood exactly who they'd underestimated. 6 months before Richard died, my life was everything I'd worked for. Simple, peaceful, earned. Every morning started the same way, and I loved the predictability of it. I'd wake up at 6:30 exactly when the first sunlight touched our bedroom window. Richard would already be awake, reading the newspaper in bed, his reading glasses perched on his nose. I'd lean over and kiss his cheek, rough with overnight stubble, and he'd pat my hand absent-mindedly, never looking up from the financial section. "Coffee, darling?" I'd ask. "You read my mind," he'd answer. The same exchange for 45 years. I'd put on my blue cotton robe, the one with the frayed collar I refused to replace because it was comfortable, and pad downstairs to our kitchen. Our home was a 4-bedroom colonial we'd bought 30 years ago when Richard's business finally took off. Every room held memories. The nick in the hallway wall from when Michael learned to ride his bike indoors. The height marks on the kitchen door frame, tracking 3 children growing up. The family photos covering every surface. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren's first steps. I'd brew the coffee in the same old percolator we got as a wedding gift. Richard always said he could taste the difference between that and the fancy machines our children tried to buy us. While it bubbled, I'd look out the window at my rose garden. 23 different varieties, each one planted with care over the years. The garden was my sanctuary, my pride. Neighbors would stop by just to admire the blooms. Richard would come down around 7:15, already dressed for work in one of his pressed suits. I'd have his coffee ready, 2 sugars, a splash of cream, alongside his breakfast. Scrambled eggs, wheat toast, sliced oranges. He'd eaten the same breakfast for 40 years. "What's on your agenda today?" he'd ask while scanning his phone. I'd tell him about my plans: volunteering at the church food pantry on Mondays, lunch with my book club on Tuesdays, helping Sarah with the grandchildren on Wednesdays, working in my garden, running errands, the rhythm of a life well lived. Richard would nod, kiss my forehead, and head to his office downtown. "Love you, Mags," he'd call from the doorway. "Love you too," I'd respond, watching him back out of the driveway in his Mercedes, the one I'd convinced him to buy 3 years ago because he deserved something nice. My days had a comforting structure. I'd spend mornings tending to the house, this beautiful space we'd built together. I'd dust the bookshelves lined with photo albums. I'd water the plants on the sunny windowsills. I'd prepare ingredients for dinner, Richard's favorite meals that I'd perfected over decades. Pot roast on Mondays, lasagna on Wednesdays, grilled salmon on Fridays. Afternoons were for my activities. I'd drive to the community center in my sensible sedan and spend hours organizing donation drives or teaching knitting classes to younger women. Everyone knew me there. "Margaret, you're a godsend," they'd say. It felt good to be needed, to be valued. Tuesday afternoons were sacred. My book club with 5 women I'd known for 30 years. We'd meet at different houses, drinking tea and discussing novels, but mostly catching up on life. Grandchildren, health scares, travel plans, the comfortable conversation of women who'd grown old together. Sundays were family days. Our 3 children would bring the grandchildren over for dinner. The house would explode with noise and laughter. 6 grandchildren ranging from 4 to 15, running through rooms that had been quiet all week. I'd cook for hours, a massive spread of everyone's favorites, and watch my family gather around the table we'd bought when Sarah was born. Richard would sit at the head of that table, and I'd watch him laugh at his grandchildren's stories. I'd see him ruffle their hair and sneak them extra dessert when their parents weren't looking. In those moments, everything made sense. All the sacrifices, all the hard years, they'd led to this. A family, a legacy, a life of meaning. We'd started planning our 50th anniversary trip. Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice. The trip we'd talked about since our honeymoon, but never taken because there was always something more important. Children's college funds, business investments, helping the kids with down payments on their first homes. 50 years, Mags, Richard had said one night as we sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance over my rose garden. We made it. Not everyone does. I'd squeezed his hand, feeling the gold wedding band he'd never taken off. We built something good, didn't we? We built something great, he'd replied. I believed him. I believed every word. I believed in the sanctuary we'd created, in the peaceful life we'd earned through decades of partnership and compromise and love. I had no idea I was living in a beautiful lie. I had no idea that while I was tending my roses and preparing his favorite meals and planning our anniversary trip, Richard was building an entirely different life. With someone else, someone younger, someone he thought deserved what I'd spent 45 years creating. But that morning, 6 months before the funeral, I didn't know any of that yet. That morning, I was just Margaret Wallace, 68 years old, living her normal, peaceful, well-earned life. That morning, I was still happy. It started with a phone call on a Thursday evening in late September. We were having dinner, chicken parmesan, Richard's second favorite, when his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, and something flickered across his face, something I'd never seen before. He quickly flipped the phone face down and picked up his fork like nothing had happened. "Aren't you going to check that?" I asked casually. "It's just work. It can wait." He smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. His phone buzzed again, and again, 3 times in 2 minutes. Richard's jaw tightened. He grabbed the phone, stood up from the table, and walked into his study, closing the door behind him. In 45 years, Richard had never left the dinner table to take a call. Never. I sat there with my fork suspended in mid-air, a strange feeling creeping into my chest. Something was off, but I couldn't name it. When he came back 15 minutes later, his face was flushed. "Sorry about that. Crisis at the office. On a Thursday night? You know how it is." He didn't meet my eyes. A few days later, I was putting away his laundry, something I'd done every week for 45 years, when I picked up his navy suit jacket. As I reached for a hanger, I caught a scent that made me freeze. Perfume. Sweet, floral, expensive. Definitely not mine. I'd worn the same perfume since 1985, a light lavender scent Richard had bought me on our 10th anniversary. This was different. This was young. This was deliberate. I held the jacket to my nose and breathed in. The scent was embedded in the fabric, not just a passing encounter. My hands started to shake. "Richard," I called downstairs. "Yeah?" His voice came from the living room. "Your jacket smells like perfume." There was a pause. Too long. "Oh, that. I had a meeting downtown. The elevator was packed. You know how people bathe in that stuff." His explanation was smooth, reasonable. The old Margaret would have accepted it immediately, but something in his tone, too casual, too prepared, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Over the next 2 weeks, I started noticing other things, small things, unconnected things that my brain kept trying to piece together like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Richard started showering the moment he walked in the door. Before, he'd come home, kiss my cheek, change into comfortable clothes, and we'd have dinner. Now he'd walk past me with barely a greeting, head straight upstairs, and spend 20 minutes in the bathroom. When he came down, his hair would be wet, his skin pink from scrubbing. "Long day?" I'd ask. "You have no idea," he'd mutter, avoiding my gaze. His phone became an extension of his hand. At breakfast, at dinner, even during our evening television time, he'd be scrolling, typing, smiling at messages he never shared. When I'd glance over, he'd tilt the screen away. "Something interesting?" I'd ask. "Just boring work emails," he'd say, but his thumb would already be closing whatever he'd been reading. One afternoon, I was reviewing our credit card statements, something I did every month to track our budget. A charge caught my eye. Ashford and Rose, a jewelry store downtown. $800 2 weeks ago. I hadn't received any jewelry. I checked the date. October 15th. Not my birthday, not our anniversary, not any occasion I could remember. My heart started beating faster. I went through the previous month's statements. More charges I didn't recognize. Dante's, an upscale Italian restaurant across town, $400. Marco's Flowers, $150. La Perla Lingerie Boutique, $300. The lingerie hit me like a punch to the stomach. I opened my drawer and looked at my practical cotton undergarments, size large, comfortable, age-appropriate. The La Perla charge was for a size small. I sat at the kitchen table with those statements spread in front of me, my hands trembling. My mind raced through explanations. Maybe gifts for clients, maybe for our daughter Sarah. Maybe I was forgetting something, but I wasn't forgetting anything. I never forgot anything. That night, Richard came home late. Again. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Board meeting ran long. You know how Peterson goes on." He loosened his tie and headed for the stairs. "Richard," I called after him. He stopped. "Did you buy me jewelry recently?" His back stiffened. "What?" "I saw a charge from Ashford and Rose." He turned around slowly. His expression was carefully blank. "Oh, that was for my secretary. Retirement gift. She's been with the company 20 years. $800 for a secretary? She's been very loyal." His voice had an edge now. "Is there a problem, Margaret?" The way he said my name, cold, defensive, made me step back. No problem. I was just curious." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and went upstairs. I heard the bathroom door close, the shower start. I stood alone in our kitchen, surrounded by 45 years of memories, and felt the foundation of my life beginning to crack. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Richard, listening to his steady breathing, and told myself I was being ridiculous. 45 years. We'd been married for 45 years. Richard had been faithful through everything, through the lean years when we barely had money for groceries, through the stressful years of building his business, through the years when I was exhausted and touched out from raising 3 small children. Why would he stray now? We were old. I was 68. He was 70. Affairs were for younger people with midlife crises. We were past all that. We'd earned our peace. The perfume was from a crowded elevator. Obviously, downtown office buildings were packed with women wearing too much perfume. It lingered on everyone's clothes. I was being paranoid. The jewelry? He'd explained it. A retirement gift for a loyal employee. Richard was generous with his staff. That's who he was. That's who he'd always been. The late-night showers? He worked in the city. He came home feeling grimy. That made sense. I was reading too much into normal behavior. I turned over and looked at Richard's sleeping face in the dim light from the window. The face I'd woken up next to for 45 years. I knew every line, every feature. This was the man who'd held my hand during 3 difficult labors. The man who'd cried when his mother died. The man who danced with me in the kitchen to our wedding song just last year. "You're being paranoid, Margaret," I whispered to myself in the darkness. I thought about my book club friends. Martha had gone through this same spiral 5 years ago, convinced her husband was cheating because he'd joined a gym and started dressing better. Turned out he was just trying to get healthy after a diabetes scare. We'd all laughed about it later, about how suspicious wives could turn innocent actions into evidence of betrayal. I didn't want to be that wife. The suspicious, insecure, jealous wife who drove her husband away with constant accusations and mistrust. Richard had never given me a reason not to trust him. Never. Not in 45 years of marriage. He'd been a good husband, a good father, a good provider. He still told me he loved me every morning. He still kissed me goodbye. He still came home to me every night. So what if he was distracted lately? His business was expanding. He was under stress. I should be supporting him, not interrogating him about credit card charges and perfume. I decided to let it go, to trust my husband the way I'd always trusted him, to believe in the life we'd built together. Over the next few weeks, I forced myself to stop checking the credit card statements. I stopped paying attention to when he showered. I stopped noticing the phone calls he took in private. I threw myself into being the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meals with extra care. I made sure the house was spotless. I didn't complain when he came home late. I smiled when he was distracted. I gave him space when he seemed stressed. I convinced myself that if I was just patient enough, just understanding enough, just loving enough, everything would go back to normal. Every time a suspicious thought crept into my mind, I pushed it away. I replaced it with a happy memory. Our wedding day, the birth of our first child, family vacations, Christmas mornings, 45 years of good memories to outweigh a few weeks of strange behavior. Marriage is about trust, I told myself every morning, and I trust Richard. I believed it because I had to, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. The alternative was that I'd given my entire life to a man who saw me as disposable. That at 68 years old, after sacrificing everything, I was about to lose everything. No, I refused to believe that. So I smiled through the doubt. I cooked through the fear. I loved through the suspicion. I chose denial because denial felt safer than the truth. But denial, I would soon learn, only delays the inevitable. It doesn't prevent it. And the longer you deny reality, the harder it hits when it finally crashes through your carefully constructed walls. That crash was coming. Soon. I just didn't know it yet. The truth found me on a Tuesday morning while I was doing laundry. Such a mundane moment for a life to fall apart. I was in our bedroom, sorting Richard's dress pants for dry cleaning, my mind on the grocery list I needed to make. I reached into the pocket of his gray trousers, the ones he'd worn last Thursday, checking for loose change or forgotten receipts before sending them out. My fingers touched paper. I pulled out a folded receipt and almost tossed it in the trash. Then something made me look at it, really look at it. The Meridian Hotel, downtown, October 18th. My hands went numb. 1 deluxe king room, champagne service, 2 filet mignon dinners, room service breakfast for 2. Total, $847.32. October 18th. That was the Thursday. Richard said he had a late board meeting. The Thursday, he came home at midnight, showered immediately, and barely spoke to me. I sat down hard on the edge of our bed, the bed we'd shared for 45 years, and stared at that receipt until the numbers blurred. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he'd expensed a client dinner. Maybe the company put someone up for the night. Maybe. But champagne service? Room service breakfast? You don't have a board meeting in a hotel room with champagne and breakfast for 2. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and opened our credit card account, the one I managed, the one I checked monthly but never obsessively. I went back through 3 months of statements. There it was, a pattern I'd been too trusting to see. The Meridian Hotel, September 20th, $673. Dante's Restaurant, every Thursday for the past 2 months, charges ranging from $200 to $400. Marco's Flowers, weekly, always on Wednesdays. La Perla Lingerie Boutique, 3 separate charges, $300, $425s, $275s. Tiffany & Co., Zemun $200. My vision started to tunnel. I couldn't breathe properly. Each charge was a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I opened the browser on my laptop with trembling fingers and searched for Dante's Restaurant. The website loaded. Dante's, Denver's most romantic fine dining experience. Intimate booths, live piano, perfect for date nights. Date nights. I ran to the bathroom and vomited. When I came back, I forced myself to keep looking. I had to know. I had to see the full picture of my own betrayal. I went through Richard's dresser drawers, something I'd never done in 45 years of marriage. In the back of his sock drawer, underneath the Argyle socks I'd given him last Christmas, I found a small box. My hands shook as I opened it. A receipt from Tiffany's for a diamond pendant necklace, $200. Happy anniversary, my darling J. Love always, R. J. Not M for Margaret, J. I clutched that receipt and felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart. Hearts don't break cleanly. They shatter into 1,000 pieces that cut you from the inside out. I thought about the necklace Richard had given me on our anniversary 2 months ago. A simple silver chain from Macy's. Maybe $100. He'd apologized for not getting something nicer, said business was tight. Business was tight. But he'd spent $200 on a diamond necklace for someone named Jay. I went back to the credit card statements and looked more carefully at the dates. The patterns became clear. Every Thursday, Dante's Restaurant. Every Wednesday, Flowers. The hotel visits were monthly, like clockwork. Always the same hotel. Always the same extravagance. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a routine, a ritual. A second life my husband had been living right under my nose. I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by credit card statements and receipts, and felt 45 years of trust disintegrate like paper in water. The perfume I'd smelled, the late showers, the distracted behavior, the secret phone calls. It all made horrible, perfect sense now. Richard was having an affair. My husband, the man I'd worked 2 jobs to put through school, the man I'd raised 3 children for, the man I'd devoted my entire adult life to, was spending our money on another woman. I looked around our bedroom, the wedding photo on the dresser, the quilt my grandmother had made us, the reading glasses on Richard's nightstand. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't explain this away. I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't convince myself I was being paranoid. The evidence was here, in black and white, in charges and receipts and diamond necklaces for women named Jay. I sat there for over an hour just staring at the papers in my hands, watching my entire life rewrite itself in my mind. Every late meeting was a lie. Every board dinner was a date with her. Every time he'd showered immediately after coming home, he'd been washing her perfume off his skin. How long had I been the fool? How long had they been laughing at the stupid old wife who suspected nothing? I heard the garage door open. Richard was home for lunch, something he did every Tuesday. I quickly shoved everything back where I'd found it. I wasn't ready to confront him yet. I needed time to think, time to process, time to figure out what to do with this information that was burning a hole through my chest. "Margaret," Richard called from downstairs. "I'm home." I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. My face was pale. My eyes were red. I splashed cold water on my cheeks and forced myself to breathe. "Coming," I called back, my voice somehow steady. I walked downstairs to make my husband lunch, my hands still trembling, the hotel receipt burning in my pocket like evidence of a crime. And for the first time in 45 years, I looked at Richard Wallace and saw a stranger. I couldn't carry the secret for more than 3 days. It was eating me alive from the inside out. On Thursday evening, I made a decision. If Richard was going to his usual board meeting, I was going to follow him. I needed to see her. I needed to see the woman who was worth more than 45 years of my devotion. At 6:00 p.m., Richard came downstairs in his best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd helped him pick out last year. He smelled of expensive cologne. "Board meeting tonight," he said, kissing my cheek mechanically. "Don't wait up." "Okay," I whispered. "I love you." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. For a moment, I thought he might say it back. Instead, he just nodded and left. I waited exactly 3 minutes. Then I grabbed my car keys and followed. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I stayed 3 cars back as Richard drove downtown, past his office building, past the street where the board meeting supposedly happened. He pulled into the parking lot of Dante's restaurant. I parked across the street where I could see the entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs. Richard got out, checked his reflection in the car window, and walked inside. 7 minutes later, a silver BMW pulled up. A woman stepped out, and my breath caught in my throat. She was beautiful, blonde hair that caught the streetlight, a red dress that hugged her curves, long legs in high heels. She couldn't have been older than 35. She was young enough to be our daughter. I watched through blurred vision as Richard met her at the door. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not a polite kiss, a passionate kiss. The kind of kiss he hadn't given me in years. The kind of kiss that told me everything. They disappeared inside the restaurant. I could see them through the window, sitting in an intimate corner booth. Richard was holding her hand across the table. He was looking at her the way he used to look at me 45 years ago, like she was his entire world. I sat in my car and cried until I couldn't see. Then I drove home, my tears making the streetlights blur into streaks of light. When Richard came home at 11:47 p.m., I was waiting in the living room. All the lights were on. "Margaret? Why are you still—" He stopped when he saw my face. "Who is she?" My voice was surprisingly steady. His face went white. "What are you talking about?" "Don't." I stood up. "Don't you dare lie to me anymore. I followed you tonight. I saw you. I saw her. I saw you kiss her." Richard's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in our marriage, he had nothing to say. "How long?" I asked. "Margaret." "How long?" I was screaming now. 45 years of being the quiet, supportive wife exploded out of me. Richard's shoulders slumped. 3 years. 3 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of lies. 3 years of her. 3 years while I cooked his meals and washed his clothes and believed in us. "Her name is Jessica," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "She's my executive assistant." "Your assistant?" I laughed, a horrible sound. How cliché, how absolutely predictable. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't tell me you didn't mean it. You meant it every Thursday for 3 years. You meant it with every hotel room, every expensive dinner, every diamond necklace." His eyes widened. "You went through my things?" "I found the receipt, Richard. The Tiffany's receipt. Happy anniversary, my darling Jay. You gave her a $1,200 necklace and gave me a $100 chain from Macy's." Shame flickered across his face, but not enough. Not nearly enough. "I was going to tell you," he said weakly. "When, on our 50th anniversary? Or were you just going to keep living 2 lives until I died?" "You don't understand. Then explain it to me." I moved closer to him. "Explain to me how the woman who put you through business school, who raised your children, who cared for your dying mother, who gave you everything, explain to me how I deserved this." Richard looked at me then, really looked at me, and what he said next destroyed what was left of my heart. "I fell in love with her, Margaret." His voice was almost gentle, which made it worse. "She makes me feel alive again. She makes me feel young. You and I, we've become more like roommates than husband and wife. You have your routines. I have mine. There's no passion anymore, no excitement. I'm 68 years old, Richard. What did you expect? I gave you my youth. I gave you my body. I gave you 3 children in 45 years of my life. And now you're punishing me for aging. I'm not punishing you. You're in love with someone young enough to be our daughter. I was crying now, ugly crying. What does she see in you? A 70-year-old man? Or does she see your bank account? Richard's face hardened. She loves me for who I am. She loves you for what you can give her, and you're too blind and too flattered to see it. We stood in our living room surrounded by 45 years of memories and looked at each other like enemies. I want a divorce, Richard said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. Final, irreversible. You want to marry her? It wasn't a question. Yes. I felt something inside me turn to ice. Get out. Margaret, get out of my sight. Go to her. Go to your young, beautiful girlfriend who makes you feel alive. Get out of this house. Richard grabbed his keys and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the knob, just like he had hours earlier. I'm sorry, he said without turning around. No, you're not, I whispered, but you will be. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I collapsed onto the floor of the home we'd built together, sobbing for the man I'd loved, the life I'd lost, and the fool I'd been. Richard didn't come home that night, or the next. He'd moved in with Jessica, apparently. Our children were devastated. Sarah came over every day, her face tight with anger at her father. But I was strangely calm, numb, moving through the house like a ghost. 3 days after our confrontation, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and decided to check our finances, just to see where we stood, just to understand what a divorce might look like. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account. My tea went cold in my hands. Our savings account, the one we'd built over 45 years, the one that had $340,000 last time I checked, now had $89,000. Over $250,000 was gone. My hands shook as I clicked through the transaction history, transfers. Dozens of transfers over the past 6 months. $10,000 here, $25,000 there, all going to accounts I didn't recognize. I checked our investment portfolio. Richard had liquidated 3 accounts, gone. Over $180,000 worth of stocks we'd carefully accumulated vanished. This wasn't just an affair. This was systematic theft. I spent the rest of the night going through every financial document I could find. The picture that emerged made me physically sick. Richard had been planning this for months, maybe longer. He'd opened new accounts in his name only. He'd transferred money to offshore investments I'd never heard of. He'd changed the beneficiaries on his life insurance policies. My name replaced with Jessica's. Our retirement accounts, the ones I thought were untouchable. He'd taken loans against them, early withdrawal penalties. Huge chunks of money moved into places I couldn't track. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. Richard's brother, Tom, his business partner for 30 years. Margaret, we need to talk, Tom said, his voice uncomfortable. About what? Richard wants to buy out my share of the business. He's made some financial decisions I don't agree with. I thought you should know. My blood ran cold. What kind of decisions? Tom was quiet for a long moment. He's been restructuring the company, transferring assets. He's setting up Jessica as a co-owner. Margaret, I think he's planning to push you out of everything. Did you know about the affair? Another pause. I suspected. I'm sorry, I should have told you. How long have you known? About a year. I hung up on him. A year. Richard's own brother had known for a year and said nothing. They were all in on it. Protecting Richard. Protecting the business. None of them had thought to protect me. I pulled up Richard's recent credit card statements again, the ones he thought I wasn't checking anymore. More hotels, but also meetings with lawyers, estate planning attorneys, asset protection specialists. He wasn't just leaving me. He was making sure I'd have nothing when he did. I found a note in Richard's home office tucked into a folder labeled Future Planning. His handwriting: transfer property titles, update will, protect business assets, Jay deserves security. Jay deserves security, after 3 years, while I'd given him 45. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Mom, I just talked to Dad's lawyer. He filed for divorce yesterday. He's asking for spousal support from you. Says you haven't worked in decades, and he needs to maintain his lifestyle." Spousal support. From me. After he'd stolen our savings and given it to his mistress. I called Richard. He answered on the first ring. "What do you want?" "Margaret." "I want to understand," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You're not just leaving me. You're trying to destroy me." "I'm protecting what I built. What we built. I put you through business school. I raised your children while you built that company. I sacrificed everything." "You were a housewife, Margaret. I was the one who earned the money. I was the one who took the risks. The business is mine. The assets are mine. Jessica understands what I've built. She appreciates it. She deserves to share in my success." His words hit me like ice water. After 45 years, this is what he thought of me. A housewife, not a partner, not the foundation he'd built upon, just a housewife. "And what do I deserve, Richard?" "I'll make sure you're taken care of, a modest settlement, enough to live on." How generous. "Don't be bitter, Margaret. It's not attractive." I hung up and sat in the silence of our kitchen. The kitchen where I'd made 45 years of meals, where I'd comforted crying children, where I'd celebrated birthdays and holidays, where I'd built a life. And now Richard was going to take it all and hand it to a woman who'd known him for 3 years. I looked at the financial statements spread across the table, the missing money, the transferred assets, the changed beneficiaries, the legal consultations. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was war. And Richard had just made a fatal mistake. He'd underestimated me. He'd forgotten who'd managed every penny of our household finances for 45 years. He'd forgotten who'd actually read every document, every contract, every piece of paper he'd signed without looking. He'd forgotten that I wasn't just a housewife. I was the woman who knew where all the bodies were buried, and I was about to dig them all up. I don't remember walking to my rose garden. I just found myself there, on my knees in the dirt, surrounded by the flowers I'd tended for 20 years. And I shattered. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I didn't know existed. 45 years of being strong, of holding everything together, of never complaining. It all came pouring out in ugly, guttural cries that didn't sound human. I fell forward onto my hands, dirt grinding into my palms, and screamed into the earth. The memories attacked me like physical blows. I was 23 again, standing in our tiny apartment, holding a positive pregnancy test and a rejection letter from the teaching program I'd applied to. Richard had just gotten into business school. We couldn't afford both. "It's okay," I'd told him, pushing my dreams into a drawer. "Your education is an investment in our future." Our future. What a joke. I was 38 months pregnant with our third child, working double shifts at the diner while Richard networked at business conferences. My feet were so swollen I could barely stand. My back screamed with pain, but I smiled through it because we needed the money, because I was building our future. I was 45, sitting beside Richard's hospital bed after his heart surgery, holding his hand through the night while he slept. I'd been terrified of losing him. I'd prayed to God to let him live. I'd promised to take care of him forever. Forever didn't mean what I thought it meant. I was 53, bathing Richard's mother, changing her soiled sheets for the 1,000th time, listening to her call me by her daughter's name because dementia had stolen her memory. Richard's siblings sent flowers. I did the work for 7 years. 7 years of my life caring for a woman who didn't know who I was. And for what? Every memory was a knife, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every piece of myself I'd given away, all of it worthless, discarded, replaced by a 35-year-old woman in a red dress. I looked down at my hands, old hands, wrinkled, age-spotted. These hands had worked 2 jobs to put Richard through school. These hands had changed diapers and cleaned wounds and cooked 10,000 meals. These hands had held his mother's frail body and wiped her tears. These hands were the hands of a fool. I pressed my face into the dirt and wished I could disappear. 68 years old. No career. I'd given that up. No savings. Richard had stolen it. No identity outside of being Richard Wallace's wife. And he didn't want me anymore. What was I without him? Who was Margaret Cooper Wallace if she wasn't a wife, a mother, a caretaker? I was nothing. An old woman, disposable, invisible. Jessica was young, beautiful, full of potential. She made Richard feel alive. I made him feel old, a reminder of everything he wanted to escape. I looked at my reflection in the garden pond, gray hair, lined face, tired eyes. When had I become this old woman? When had I stopped being the vibrant girl Richard had fallen in love with? But I knew the answer. I'd become old giving him my youth. I'd become tired sacrificing my energy for his dreams. I'd become invisible while making sure everyone else was seen. The roses around me seemed to mock me with their beauty. I'd planted them with such hope. Each one represented a year of our marriage. I'd tended them carefully, lovingly, believing I was nurturing something that would last forever. But roses die. And apparently, so do marriages. I thought about just giving up, letting Richard take everything, moving into a small apartment somewhere, living out my remaining years as that sad old divorced woman everyone pitied. At 68, wasn't I too old to fight? Too tired to start over? My phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. She'd somehow gotten my number. Richard asked me to tell you he needs you out of the house by the end of the month. He's putting it on the market, I'm sure you understand. Fresh starts and all. The house? My house. The one I'd made a home. She wanted me out of my own home. I stared at that text message, my vision blurring with tears. And then something shifted. I remembered my grandmother, a woman who'd survived the Depression, who'd raised 7 children alone after my grandfather died in a factory accident. She'd been fierce, unbreakable. She'd once told me, "Margaret Rose, the world will try to make you small. Never let them. Fight for what's yours." I'd forgotten that lesson. For 45 years, I'd made myself smaller, quieter, more convenient. I looked at my old hands again. They weren't just the hands of a fool. They were the hands of a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd built something from nothing. Richard and Jessica thought they'd won. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I stood up from the dirt, wiped my face, and walked back into my house. I was done crying. It was time to fight back. I washed the dirt from my hands and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. My eyes were swollen from crying. My face was blotchy and red. My hair was a mess. I looked exactly like what Richard thought I was, a pathetic old woman whose best days were behind her. But as I stared at my reflection, something inside me hardened, crystallized, became sharp and cold and focused. "No," I said out loud to my reflection. "No more." I thought about my grandmother again. She'd been widowed at 40 with 7 children and no money. Everyone expected her to crumble. Instead, she'd opened a boarding house, learned bookkeeping, and built a life. She died at 92, independent and proud until the end. Her blood ran through my veins. I wasn't just Richard Wallace's discarded wife. I was Margaret Rose Cooper, a woman who'd survived and thrived long before Richard came into my life. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that. I'd let my identity become so tangled with his that I'd lost sight of who I was. But I was still here, still standing, still breathing. And I was done being a victim. I walked into Richard's home office, the room he'd forbidden me from entering for privacy reasons. Privacy. What a laugh. I sat down at his desk and began opening drawers. I'd been managing our household finances for 45 years. I knew how to read contracts, track expenses, and understand legal documents. Richard had always relied on me for that. He was the big-picture visionary. I was the detail person who made sure everything actually worked. He'd forgotten that, underestimated me, dismissed me as just a housewife. That was going to be his biggest mistake. I pulled out file after file, business contracts, property deeds, investment statements, insurance policies, tax returns going back decades. And as I read through them, a slow smile spread across my face. 20 years ago, Richard's first business venture had nearly bankrupted us. We'd been sued, creditors were circling, and we were in danger of losing everything. Our lawyer at the time, a sharp woman named Lia Stories, had advised us to transfer all our major assets into my name for protection. It was a common strategy: shield the assets from business liability. We'd done it. The house, the rental properties, the investment accounts, the savings, everything had been put in my name. Margaret Rose Wallace, sole owner. Richard's business had recovered. But we'd never transferred the assets back into joint ownership. There had been no reason to. We were married. What was mine was his. What was his was mine. Except legally, that wasn't true. Legally, almost everything was mine. I kept reading, my hands steady now, my mind clear. The properties Richard thought he owned. My name on the deeds. The investment accounts he'd been so proud of building, listed as my individual accounts, not joint. Even the rental properties generating income every month, all in my name. Richard had been so busy building his empire and planning his new life with Jessica that he'd never bothered to check the actual paperwork. He just assumed that, because he'd earned the money, because he was the businessman, everything belonged to him. But assumptions aren't legal documents. I pulled out my phone and searched for Lia Stories' law firm. She was still practicing, now a senior partner specializing in family law and asset protection. I dialed her number. It was 9:00 a.m. Her secretary answered. "This is Margaret Wallace. I need to schedule an urgent appointment with Lia Stories. Tell her it's about protecting assets in a divorce. Tell her I'm the woman who took her advice 20 years ago, and now I need her help collecting what's mine. She has an opening tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll be there." I hung up and sat back in Richard's chair, my chair now, my house, my office, my life to reclaim. For 45 years, I'd been the supporting character in Richard's story, the faithful wife, the selfless mother, the woman behind the man. But this was my story now, and I was going to be the hero. Richard and Jessica thought they'd planned everything so carefully. They thought they'd outmaneuvered me, the naive old housewife who wouldn't know how to fight back. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson. I wasn't broken. I was angry. And an angry woman who'd spent 45 years managing finances, reading contracts, and paying attention to details? That was the most dangerous kind of woman there was. I opened Richard's computer. He'd never changed the password from our wedding anniversary, the fool, and started making copies of everything. Bank statements, business contracts, emails, text messages to Jessica discussing asset transfers and protecting what we're building together. Evidence. I was collecting evidence. By the time I finished, it was midnight. I'd been working for 15 hours straight, and I'd never felt more awake, more alive, more powerful in my life. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the kitchen. I thought I'd have to leave, but I wasn't going anywhere. Richard wanted fresh starts? He was about to get one, just not the one he'd planned. I smiled into my tea, and for the first time in weeks, it was a genuine smile. The war had begun, and I was going to win. Lia Stories' office was on the 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city Richard thought he owned. Linda was 60 now, sharp as ever in a tailored suit, her silver hair cut in a precise bob. She stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. "Margaret Wallace, I remember you." She gestured to a leather chair. 20 years ago, you and Richard were about to lose everything. I helped you protect your assets." "You did." I sat down and placed a thick folder on her desk. "And now I need you to help me keep them." Linda opened the folder and began reading. Her eyebrows rose higher with each page. After 15 minutes of silence, she looked up at me with something like admiration. "Does Richard know what's in his own financial records?" "He never bothered to check. He thinks he owns everything because he earned the money." Linda leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Margaret, do you understand what you're sitting on here? Tell me." She pulled out the property deeds. "The house. Purchased 1995. Title Margaret Rose Wallace, sole owner. The 3 rental properties generating $6,000 a month in income, all in your name. The investment portfolio worth $480,000. Individual account Margaret Rose Wallace. Even the vacation condo in Aspen, yours." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "What about the business?" "The business itself is registered to Richard, but..." She pulled out another document. "The commercial property it operates from? The building itself? You own it. He's technically been renting from you for 15 years, though the rent goes into your joint account, so it's a wash." I felt lightheaded. "So when Richard says he's leaving me with nothing, he's leaving you with everything. Or rather, he can't leave you with what you already own." Linda spread the documents across her desk like a winning poker hand. "Margaret, in this divorce, you're not the vulnerable party. He is. But he's been transferring money. From joint accounts, yes. That's Marshall property, and you're entitled to half regardless. It's messy, but recoverable. But the real assets? The properties, the investments, the tangible wealth? Those were protected in your name 20 years ago, and they've stayed that way." Linda pulled up more documents on her computer. "Now, here's where it gets interesting. Your husband has been financially creative lately." She turned the screen toward me. "Loans. So many loans. Richard borrowed against his business to fund his lifestyle with Jessica. The hotels, the gifts, the restaurants. He's been living beyond his actual means for 3 years. He's taken out personal loans, business loans, even a second mortgage he tried to put on the house, which failed because he doesn't own it." "How much does he owe?" Linda's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Conservative estimate? $2.3 million in various debts and liabilities." The number hung in the air between us. "And here's the beautiful part," Linda continued, her eyes gleaming. "I've been tracking his legal consultations through public records. Richard has been meeting with estate attorneys. He's rewriting his will. Any guesses who he's making his primary beneficiary?" "Jessica," I whispered. "Jessica Davis. Who will inherit not Richard's assets, because those are mostly yours, but his debts, his liabilities, his spectacular mess." I sat back, the full picture finally clear. He's leaving her his problems, while thinking he's leaving her a fortune. Linda closed her laptop. "Now, here's my advice. We could confront him now, file for divorce, fight this out in court for months. Or what?" Linda leaned forward, her voice conspiratorial. "Or we let him keep going. We let him finish his estate planning. We let him move forward with his grand plan to leave everything to Jessica. We don't correct his assumptions. We stay very, very quiet. Why? Because the best revenge isn't winning in court, Margaret. It's letting your enemy defeat themselves." She smiled. "Richard thinks he's setting Jessica up for life. Let him complete that thought. Let him sign all the papers. Let him make her his primary beneficiary. And then, when the time is right, the truth comes out," I finished. "Exactly. He'll be gone or irrelevant. Jessica will be stuck with his debts, and you'll be sitting on the actual assets, untouchable." I thought about Richard's face when he told me I deserved a modest settlement. I thought about Jessica's text telling me to get out of my own house. I thought about 45 years of devotion being tossed aside like garbage. How long do we wait? Until he's made every legal commitment he can. Until there's no taking it back. until the trap is completely set. Linda pulled out a legal pad. In the meantime, we document everything. Every transfer he makes, every debt he incurs, every promise he makes to Jessica. We build an airtight case not for court, but for the moment of truth. What moment? Linda's smile was cold and satisfied. That's up to you, Margaret, but I suggest something public, something that makes the betrayal as visible as possible, something that ensures everyone who matters sees exactly what Richard Wallace really is. I sat in that office for 3 more hours. We planned every detail, every document I needed to secure, every move Richard might make and how to counter it, every legal protection to ensure what was mine stayed mine. When I finally left, the sun was setting over the city. I stood on the sidewalk and called Sarah. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm better than okay, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. "I'm going to be just fine, but I need you to do something for me. Anything. Don't tell your father I saw a lawyer. Let him think I'm broken. Let him think he's won." There was a pause. "Mom, what are you planning?" I smiled at my reflection in the building's glass doors. "Justice, darling. I'm planning justice." 3 months passed. 3 months of watching Richard play happy families with Jessica while I played the broken, defeated wife. I was perfect in my role. I didn't fight the divorce proceedings. I didn't argue when Richard's lawyer sent me insulting settlement offers. I attended mediation sessions with my head down, my voice quiet, tears always ready. "She's taking this hard," Richard's lawyer told Linda. "She's not going to cause problems." Linda would squeeze my hand under the table. We both knew the truth. Then, on a Tuesday morning in January, my phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice hysterical. "Mom, it's Dad. He collapsed at the office. They're taking him to the hospital." Richard died of a massive heart attack before the ambulance reached the emergency room. 70 years old, dead in an instant. I felt nothing, just a strange, cold emptiness where my grief should have been. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday at St. Michael's Cathedral, the church where we'd been married 45 years ago. The symmetry was almost poetic. I played my part flawlessly. Black dress, simple and dignified, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, the picture of a devastated widow. Our children surrounded me, their faces drawn with genuine grief. They'd lost their father, after all. Their anger at him couldn't erase that. The church filled quickly. Business associates, friends, neighbors, people who'd known us for decades, who remembered us as the perfect couple, who had no idea what Richard had done. I sat in the front pew, staring at Richard's casket, polished mahogany, covered in white roses. The minister spoke about Richard's accomplishments, his generosity, his love for his family. I kept my face neutral, my hands folded in my lap. After the eulogy, Mr. Patterson stood, Richard's lawyer for 30 years. He looked uncomfortable. "Before we proceed to the burial," he announced, his voice echoing through the church, "there are matters regarding Mr. Wallace's estate that must be addressed." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't typical funeral protocol. Then I heard it, the sharp click of heels on marble. Everyone turned. A woman walked down the center aisle and gasps rippled through the church. Jessica Davis, wearing a blood-red dress, skin tight, low cut, completely inappropriate for a funeral, but perfectly appropriate for what she thought was her victory parade. She wasn't crying. She wasn't mourning. She looked like she was going to a celebration. My daughter Sarah gripped my hand. "Mom, what is she—" "It's okay," I whispered. My voice was steady, calm. "Let her come." Jessica walked slowly, deliberately, her hips swaying, her head held high. She knew everyone was watching. She wanted them to watch. She stopped directly in front of Richard's casket. She placed one perfectly manicured hand on the polished wood, a gesture of ownership. Then she turned to face the congregation. Her eyes found mine, and she smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile that said, "I won." The church was silent, hundreds of people holding their breath, sensing something explosive about to happen. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Miss Davis, perhaps this isn't—" "No," Jessica interrupted, her voice clear and loud. "Richard wanted this. He wanted everyone to know the truth." She took a step toward me. I didn't move, didn't blink, just watched her with the calm I'd been perfecting for 3 months. "My name is Jessica Davis," she announced to the entire church, "and I was Richard Wallace's partner, his real partner, not just his assistant, his lover, his soulmate, the woman he actually chose." More gasps, scandalized whispers. My children started to rise, but I placed a hand on Sarah's arm. "Stay," I whispered. Jessica's smile widened. She was enjoying this. "Richard told me everything, how unhappy he'd been for years, how you—" She pointed at me. "We're just going through the motions, a placeholder, someone he'd outgrown." My face remained expressionless. Inside, I was counting down, waiting. "Before he died," Jessica continued, her voice ringing with confidence, "Richard made sure I was protected. He made sure I was taken care of. He updated his will, his life insurance, everything." She looked around at the shocked faces. "I'm sorry to do this here, but Richard wanted transparency. He wanted everyone to know who he'd chosen to spend his legacy with." Jessica turned back to me, her smile vicious now. "He left me everything. The house, the business, the investments, all of it." She paused for effect. "You get nothing, old woman." The church erupted. Angry voices, shocked exclamations. My son stood up, his face red with rage, but I pulled him back down. "Mom," he started. "Wait," I said quietly. Jessica was basking in the chaos, her moment of triumph. "Richard told me you'd been dead weight for 20 years, that you never understood his vision, his ambition, that I was the partner he'd always needed." Mr. Patterson stepped forward, his face pale. "Miss Davis, I must insist—" "What?" Jessica spun on him. "I'm his beneficiary. You know it. He told me. Everything goes to me." Mr. Patterson opened his briefcase with shaking hands. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Miss Davis," he said quietly, "this is your inheritance." Jessica's face lit up. This was it, her moment. She practically snatched the envelope from his hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She looked at me one more time. "I'm sure you understand, Margaret. Richard moved on. You should too. Though at your age—" She let the insult hang in the air. I stood up, slowly, calmly. Every eye in the church turned to me. Jessica tore open the envelope, her smile wide, her hands trembling with excitement. I watched her face. I'd been waiting 3 months for this moment, and it was perfect. Jessica pulled the papers from the envelope, her manicured nails flashing red against the white documents. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her smile faltered. The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her hands started shaking so violently the papers rattled. "What?" Her voice came out as a whisper. "What is this?" Mr. Patterson's expression was professionally neutral, but I caught the slight tightness around his eyes. He'd known this moment was coming. "That, Miss Davis, is your inheritance," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the now silent church. "As Richard Wallace's designated beneficiary, you have inherited his estate." "But this says—" Jessica's voice cracked. She looked up at him, her face white as snow. "This says debts, business loans, personal loans, credit obligations." "Yes. $2.3 million in debt?" Her voice rose to a shriek. The church erupted. Gasps. Shocked murmurs. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Jessica's eyes darted wildly across the documents, flipping pages frantically. "Where are the assets? The house? The investments? The business property?" Mr. Patterson pulled out another folder. "The assets you're referring to have been in Mrs. Wallace's name for the past 20 years. The house at 847 Maple Drive, Margaret Rose Wallace, sole owner. The 3 rental properties, Margaret Rose Wallace. The investment portfolio, Margaret Rose Wallace, the commercial building housing Wallace and Associates. Margaret Rose Wallace. Each name hit Jessica like a physical blow. She staggered backward, catching herself on a pew. "That's impossible," she gasped. "Richard told me. He showed me." "What Richard showed you were assets he believed he controlled," Mr. Patterson continued, his voice clinical. "What he failed to verify were the actual ownership documents. 20 years ago, during a business crisis, all major assets were transferred into Mrs. Wallace's name for protection. They were never transferred back." Jessica's legs gave out. She collapsed into the pew, the documents spilling from her hands across the marble floor. The church was chaos now, everyone talking at once. Richard's business associates pulling out their phones, our neighbors whispering behind their hands. Richard's brother, Tom, sat with his head in his hands. I stood up slowly. Every eye in that church turned to me. I walked toward Jessica, my steps measured, deliberate. I stopped directly in front of her, looked down at this woman who'd called me an old woman, who'd told me I got nothing, who'd tried to steal my life. Jessica looked up at me, her face destroyed, tears streaming down her cheeks, mascara running black rivers down her skin. I leaned down close enough that only the first few rows could hear, but in the perfect silence of that church, my whisper carried. "Enjoy the debt, darling." My voice was honey-sweet poison. The assets? They've been in my name for 20 years. I straightened, up and addressed the entire church, my voice ringing with quiet power. Richard was always terrible with details. The church erupted again, but this time I heard something different in the voices. Admiration, respect, even a few barely suppressed laughs. Jessica let out a sound, somewhere between a sob and a scream. She scrambled to gather the papers from the floor, her hands shaking, her red dress a stark slash of color against the somber black everyone else wore. "This can't be legal," she screamed at Mr. Patterson. "He promised me. He said I'd be taken care of." "The will is entirely legal," Mr. Patterson replied. "You are the primary beneficiary of Richard Wallace's personal estate. Unfortunately for you, that estate consists primarily of outstanding debts, failed business ventures, and financial obligations." "You knew," Jessica whirled on me, her face twisted with rage and despair. "You knew and you said nothing." I smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You wanted transparency, Jessica. You wanted everyone to know the truth. Well, here it is. The truth is that Richard was a fool who thought he could build a new life on foundations he didn't own. The truth is that he borrowed and spent and promised away money that was never his to give. And the truth is that you, my dear, fell for it." Jessica stared at me, her chest heaving, her perfect makeup destroyed. "You did this on purpose. You let him—" "I let Richard make his own choices," I interrupted, my voice cold now. "I let him sign his own documents. I let him promise you the world. I simply ensured that the world he was promising was built on sand." I turned to Mr. Patterson. "The house? Yours, Mrs. Wallace. The rental properties? Yours. The investments? All yours." I looked back at Jessica. As for Richard's business debts, his personal loans, his credit obligations, those are all yours now. Congratulations! You inherited exactly what Richard actually had to give. Jessica made a sound like a wounded animal. She lurched to her feet and ran, literally ran down the aisle in her inappropriate red dress and her impossibly high heels, the debt documents clutched in her hands, her sobs echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The heavy church doors slammed behind her with a sound like a judge's gavel. Silence fell. Then slowly people began to turn to me, and in their eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Respect. The burial was quiet after that. Jessica didn't return. The gossip would come later, but in that moment standing beside Richard's grave, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the false peace of denial, not the numb peace of resignation. real peace. The peace that comes from standing in your truth and refusing to be diminished. In the weeks that followed, I learned what had become of Jessica Davis. She tried to fight the will, of course, hired 3 different lawyers. All of them told her the same thing. It was airtight. She was legally obligated to assume Richard's debts as his primary beneficiary. The business loans came due first, then the personal credit lines, then the tax penalties from early withdrawal of retirement funds. Richard had been living so far beyond his actual means that the house of cards had been destined to collapse. He just died before it could bury him. Instead, it buried Jessica. Last I heard from Sarah, who kept tabs through the social media grapevine, Jessica had declared bankruptcy. She'd moved back to Indiana to live with her parents. The red dresses and expensive jewelry were gone, sold to pay off what she could. Her Instagram, once filled with photos of luxury and designer handbags, had been deleted. She'd wanted Richard's life. She got it. All of it. I sold 2 of the rental properties. I didn't need the hassle, and the market was strong. The money went into trust funds for my 6 grandchildren, education funds that Richard would never be able to touch because Richard was gone, and the money was mine to protect. I kept the house, though. My house. I'd earned every square foot of it, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me. I redecorated. Painted over the beige Richard had insisted on with warm yellows and soft blues. Hung art I'd always loved, but he'd called too bold. Made it mine again. In March, I finally took that Italy trip. Not with Richard, with Sarah. We spent 2 weeks wandering through Rome, Florence, and Venice. We ate pasta and gelato without counting calories. We drank wine in sidewalk cafes. We stood in the Sistine Chapel and cried at the beauty. "Mom," Sarah said one evening as we watched the sunset over the Grand Canal, "you seem different, lighter." "I am lighter," I told her. "I spent 45 years carrying someone else's dreams. It's nice to finally carry my own." I started a support group when I returned. Second Act Women, for women over 60 facing divorce, betrayal, or major life transitions. Women who'd been told they were too old, too late, too invisible to start over. We met every Tuesday in the community center. Within 3 months, we had 25 regular members. Women who'd lost themselves in marriages and caregiving and being what everyone else needed them to be. I told them my story, all of it. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the moment I decided to fight back. "You're never too old to reclaim your power," I told them. "You're never too broken to rebuild, and you're never, ever invisible, unless you choose to be." Some women cried, some took notes, some just sat and listened, hope dawning in their eyes for the first time in years. I was giving them what Linda Chen had given me, the knowledge that they weren't helpless, that the law could protect them, that careful planning and attention to detail could save them from predators, even predators they'd once loved. My children came around more often now, not out of pity, out of respect. They saw their mother differently, not as the woman who'd let their father walk all over her, but as the woman who'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "I'm sorry I doubted you, Mom," Michael said one Sunday dinner. "When Dad left, I thought you'd just give up." "I almost did," I admitted. "But then I remembered who I was before I became your father's wife, and I decided to become her again." I downsized from managing 3 rental properties to just 1, enough to supplement my income without overwhelming me. I took yoga classes. I joined a book club that actually discussed books instead of just gossiping. I traveled. Small trips at first, then bolder ones. Montreal, Santa Fe, Charleston. I was living. Not the life I'd planned, not the golden anniversary and rocking chair sunset Richard had stolen from me, but a better life. An authentic life. A life where I wasn't performing for anyone or shrinking myself to make room for someone else's ego. 6 months after the funeral, I stood in my rose garden. Smaller now, more manageable, and realized I hadn't thought about Richard in days. Not with anger, not with grief, not at all. He'd become what he deserved to be, irrelevant. Jessica? She was a cautionary tale I sometimes shared with my support group. Know your worth, I'd tell them, and more importantly, know what you legally own. But mostly, I didn't think about either of them. I thought about the life ahead of me. I was 68 years old. If I lived as long as my grandmother, I had 24 more years. 24 years to be exactly who I wanted to be. That wasn't an ending. That was a beginning. One year after Richard's funeral, I stood in my garden on a spring morning pruning roses. The ones I'd planted during our marriage were still there, but I'd added new varieties, hardier ones, brighter colors, roses that bloom twice a year instead of once. I heard footsteps behind me. My youngest granddaughter, Emma, 8 years old, skipped toward me with a handful of dandelions. "Grandma, are these weeds or flowers?" she asked. I looked at the yellow blooms in her small hands. Depends on who you ask. Some people think they're weeds that ruin a perfect lawn, but I think they're flowers that refuse to be controlled. She smiled and tucked one behind my ear. "I think you're like a dandelion, Grandma." "Oh? Why's that?" "Because you're sunny and strong and you grow wherever you want." I hugged her close, breathing in her little girl's smell of strawberry shampoo and sunshine. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. After she ran back inside, I sat on my garden bench, the new one I'd bought to replace the old one Richard and I used to share, and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been broken, betrayed, convinced I was too old, too late, too invisible to matter. Today, I was free. Betrayal doesn't diminish your worth. It reveals the character of the betrayer. When someone treats you as disposable, they're showing you who they are, not who you are. I learned that love without respect is just servitude. I'd loved Richard, but he'd never truly respected me. He'd seen my sacrifices as obligations, my devotion as weakness, my loyalty as something he could exploit. I learned that it's never too late to fight for yourself. At 68, I thought my life was over. Instead, I discovered it was just beginning. I learned that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest advantage. Richard and Jessica thought I was just a naive old housewife. They never imagined I'd spent 45 years paying attention, reading documents, understanding exactly how our life was built. I learned that revenge isn't about hatred, it's about justice. I didn't destroy Richard or Jessica out of spite. I simply allowed them to face the consequences of their own choices. But most importantly, I learned that your value isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Richard stopped seeing me. That was his blindness, not my invisibility. If you're facing betrayal right now, whether from a spouse, a family member, a business partner, or anyone else, know this: you are stronger than you think. You are smarter than they believe, and you are never, ever too old or too broken to reclaim your dignity. Protect yourself. Know what you own. Read every document. Trust, yes, but verify everything. Don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Don't sacrifice your identity to please someone who doesn't value you. Don't wait for permission to stand up for yourself. The world will try to tell you that at a certain age, you should accept your lot, that you should be grateful for scraps, that causing waves is undignified. Ignore that noise. Cause the waves. Demand respect. Fight for what's yours. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. The most dangerous person in any room isn't the loudest or the youngest or the most powerful. It's the person everyone underestimated. I'm 69 now. I run a support group. I travel. I invest my own money. I make my own decisions. I wake up every morning belonging only to myself. And I've never been happier. Richard wanted to trade me in for a younger model. He ended up trading everything for nothing. Jessica wanted to steal my life. She ended up stealing my problems. And me? I ended up with something better than revenge. I ended up with peace, freedom, and the knowledge that I am enough. I always was. Now I ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have confronted Richard the moment you found that hotel receipt? Would you have fought publicly in court? Or would you have done what I did, waited, planned, and let them destroy themselves? Have you ever been underestimated and turned it into your advantage? Have you ever faced betrayal and come out stronger? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or question something, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to fight back. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about real people facing impossible situations and finding their power. Remember, you're not too old, you're not too late, you're not invisible. You're a dandelion, sunny, strong, and growing exactly where you choose to be. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go write your own.